In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, we will begin today our third lecture in Al-Aqeedah. This third lecture will be on the fourth asl from Usul al-Din, which is al-imamah, the imamate. And the different parts that we will have today, inshallah, will be the following. Its meaning, the meaning of the imamate, the root of Shia Islam. Imamate is the root of Shia Islam, we'll see why. The 12 imams, the appointment of the imams, and actually especially Imam Ali, since he's the beginning, yes, of the imamate, he's the first imam. Then the philosophy of the imamate, and last but not least, some of their features. Of course, during our lecture today, will be simple, and we will have a kind of general presentation on imamate. Imamate as a belief is very important in the history of Shia Muslims, also inside the Islamic discussions and debates between Sunni and Shia Muslims, and in a general way in Islamic history, it was very important. So we can go into details and have hours of lectures on it. But today we will just have a kind of very general presentation. So we'll keep it simple. Its meaning. What does imamat al-imamah mean? So in Arabic, it's al-imamah. Al-imamah is the leadership of the Islamic community designated by God to succeed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in all religious and worldly matters, in religious or non-religious matters, in social matters, in economic matters, in political matters, on all the matters, on everything, political or spiritual or other fields. We as Shia Muslim, we believe that after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the action of God didn't stop. As he used to guide people before with prophets and messengers, he continues to guide people with imams. His action didn't stop. Yes, with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, an-nubuwah, prophethood, and al-risala, the divine message, stopped. That's right. There isn't any prophet after the Prophet Muhammad, nor any messenger after the Prophet Muhammad. But Allah continues to choose imams to guide people on the right path of the Prophet Muhammad, to teach them the right teachings of the Quran, and also to transmit them the right teachings of the Prophet in his Sunnah. So all these people, we call them the imams. And in our belief, they are chosen by God. We'll see that it's not a belief that other Islamic sects share with us, or at least non-Shia sects, because inside Shia Islam we have a lot of other sects, at least 3 ones. We will inshallah speak about them. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that imamah is not a small belief or a secondary belief or just a detail. It's very important, actually. As we said in the first lecture, a Muslim has to present in the hereafter a full and right Aqeedah, doctrine. And imamah is a part of this doctrine, is a part of this Aqeedah. So if your Aqeedah is not right, is not as ordered by God, is not full and complete as Allah wanted it to be, so you will have, in other words, you will have problems. And we have some ahadith that show us this aspect. So I chose two hadiths. One is a Shia one, and the second one is a Sunni one. So the first one is the Shia hadith. It's a hadith that you can find in Kamaluddin, the book Kamaluddin, written by Saduq. In this hadith, the Prophet says, if a man dies while he does not know the Imam of his time, he will die a death of Jahiliyyah. A death of Jahiliyyah, يعني he will die as a non-Muslim. That's the meaning of it. من لم يعرف إمام زمانه مات ميتة جاهلية. The other hadith, the second one, is a Sunni hadith that you can find in Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal. Ahmad bin Hanbal is very famous. He's a Sunni scholar. And you know, Sunni, they have in their fiqh 4 schools. Al-Hanabila, the Hanbalite school, the Shafi'i school, the Hanafi school, and the Maliki school. The Hanbali school was founded by Ahmad bin Hanbal. So he's very important. In his book, Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal, he narrated a hadith from the Prophet where the Prophet says, if a man dies without an Imam, he will die a death of Jahiliyyah. So this hadith is the same as the Shia one, the Shi'i one. The same content, the same idea. If a man dies without an Imam, he will die a death of Jahiliyyah. من مات بغير إمام مات ميتة جاهلية. Why? Because, as I said, Imamate is not, some people, they think it's a detail, it's just a political thing, it's just a political fights between Sunni and Shia. No, it's a very important belief in the Islamic Aqeedah. And dying without this belief is actually dying with an incomplete Aqeedah. And we saw in the first lecture that that's a very bad thing for a Muslim, because a Muslim hereafter he has to have a complete and full Aqeedah as ordered by God. Al-imamah is the root of Shia Islam. All Muslims agree that the Ummah needs leaders. Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, all the Muslims on earth, they agree that it's important for the Ummah to have leaders. However, Shia Muslims, they have a kind of particularity, is that they believe that these leaders, the imams, these leaders, they have to be designated by God. So appointed by God, with the intervention of God. As he chooses prophets for the previous communities, for our community, after the Prophet Muhammad, he chooses his successors. He chooses the imams to guide us. The Sunni Muslims, they believe that leaders and having leaders and caliphs and so on, it's very important. However, they say after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, these imams and these caliphs, they have to be chosen without the intervention of God. They say that's not a divine issue. That's a matter between the Muslims. They decide. So Abu Bakr, for example, he was chose by at the beginning by a very small group in Al-Saqifa. And they said that's a very acceptable thing. It's a normal thing and it's acceptable. And Allah doesn't chose the Imam, and Abu Bakr being chosen in As-Saqifa is very okay and accepted. Then Umar was chosen by Abu Bakr before his death, and they said yes, a caliph chosen by another caliph, the previous caliph, is also very acceptable. Then even when the Bani Umayyah and Bani al-Abbas, the Umayyads and Abbasids, they killed each other, and the Abbasids killed the Umayyads, and they took the power, they took the caliphate and so on. They said it's also acceptable thing, and after killing the Umayyads, the Abbasids, they are our new caliphs. In other words, for Sunni Muslims, the idea of Imamate or the idea of Caliphate, it's a non-religious matter. Its appointment is non-religious. The Muslims between themselves, they have to choose a caliph. So sometimes they do it peacefully, sometimes they kill each other. Anyway, all this is accepted, but Allah doesn't choose them. Of course, we don't accept this this belief. We don't accept this belief because the proofs that we have in our hand and in the Islamic sources, they show us in a very clear way that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he chose Imam Ali and the other imams as his successors. That Allah, even through some Quranic verses and some ahadith, very known ahadith, Allah used to chose the imams. So Shia 12 Muslims believe that the Ummah has to follow and obey the 12 imams of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, chosen by God to succeed the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, and guide Muslims in the right path. Shaykh al-Mudaffar, in his book The Faith of the Imamiyya Shia, he speaks about the importance of al-imamah and on al-imamah being the continuation of prophethood. He says, we also believe that imamate, just like prophethood, is a necessary grace of Almighty Allah. As a result, there must be in each age an imam to represent the Prophet in his missions of guiding and leading human beings towards the right path, that they might achieve prosperity and pleasure in this world as well as the next. Such a leader must also enjoy the same authority enjoyed by the Prophet, such as supreme authority over the people, so that he can manage their affairs and interests, maintain justice among them, and wipe out injustice and oppression. Accordingly, imamate is only a continuation of prophethood. A continuation of prophethood. And the reason for which Almighty Allah sends messengers and prophets is also the reason why the prophet must be succeeded by an imam. As we said, people before the Prophet Muhammad, they needed the guidance of Allah. And after the Prophet Muhammad, they also need the guidance of Allah. That's why because before the Prophet Muhammad, we needed prophets. Also after him, we need people chosen by God that guide people in the right path of Allah. The difference is that with the Prophet Muhammad, it was also the end of prophethood. Allah decided that the Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet, and after him, there will not be any prophet. So the imams are not prophets. They are people that are in the same philosophy of the prophets. In other words, to guide people in the right path. So most Shia nowadays, most Shia Muslims are 12ers. It means that they believe in 12 imams. Maybe between 90 and 95% of the Shia Muslims, they are 12ers. And this belief of the 12 imams, you find it in Shia hadith. And I didn't bring any Shia hadith because you have a lot of them and they are very known, and there is a consensus among Shia Muslims, 12ers, that we have 12 imams. But I brought one Sunni hadith, and they have Sunni Muslims, they have a lot of hadiths. where the Prophet mentioned the 12 imams. And some hadith he says the 12 amir, the 12 umara, rulers. In other hadith he used another word. But the same idea is always present. The idea of 12 individuals coming after him and being the commanders of his ummah. So it's interesting to find that this belief it's not just a 12 belief. It's a belief that you can find in Sunni sources even. So this hadith that I brought today is from Sahih Bukhari. Sahih Bukhari is the most important Sunni book after the Quran, and for Sunni Muslims. And they consider that every hadith that is in Sahih Bukhari is authentic. So this hadith for them is authentic because it is in Sahih Bukhari. This hadith is narrated by Jabir bin Samura. Jabir bin Samura is a companion, and he was young at that time. He was with his father, Samura, and they were sitting with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Jabir bin Samura says, I heard the Prophet say, there will be 12 Amir, and then he said a word that I did not hear, but my father said that he has said, they are all from Quraysh. So here we have a Sunni hadith, which states that the Prophet said that there will be 12 leaders after him, 12 rulers after him, and that they are all from Quraysh, from his tribe. In our belief as Shia Muslims, these 12 imams are the following. So we'll not have a biography of every imam. We'll just mention them and then maybe mention what is, or mention an important point in their life. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib is the first imam, and as I said, on his appointment as the first imam, we'll speak later with more details. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib is the cousin of the Prophet. He's also he's like his adopted son, because Abu Talib, his father, the father of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he was poor. He was in a bad financial situation. That's why, to make it easier for him, the Prophet Muhammad decided to take Ali, to take the Imam Ali when he was a very a small child, to take him in his house and to educate him. Imam Ali later also married the daughter of the Prophet, Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. And Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, and you already know it, I'm sure of that you know it. He's the most important figure, he's the most important individual in Islam after the Prophet Muhammad. And during his whole life, he always presented a lot of sacrifices, a lot of efforts, and the path of the Prophet Muhammad, and in defending the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he is the first imam. As I said, he married Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, and they had a first son that they called Imam al-Hasan. And if you go to the hadith, actually it's the Prophet Muhammad who called him Imam al-Hasan, and even it's not the Prophet, it's the angel Jibreel who called him to call him Imam al-Hasan. Anyway, so Imam al-Hasan is the second imam. He's the son of Imam Ali and Fatima al-Zahra, so he's the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His imamate began after the death of of Imam Ali, so it was 21 Ramadan, and he was imam for more or less 10 years. Then after his death, Imam al-Hussein became the third Imam, and Imam al-Hussein is very known for his role in Karbala and his death and his shahada in Karbala. After Imam Hussein, Imam Ali Sajjad, who is the son of Imam al-Hussein, became the fourth Imam. And he is also known because there was, after the death of Imam al-Hussein, there was in the Islamic world a very big crisis. And it was thanks to Imam Ali Sajjad that even the Islamic community survived, because all the sons of Imam al-Hussein were killed, except Imam Ali Sajjad, which is when we think about it, is a miracle. And he became Imam, and he continued to guide people. Then we had Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. These two Imams, they are very famous because they spread knowledge and they taught thousands of students, and they had a big participation in spreading knowledge in the Islamic countries. And if you look at the Shia hadith, most of our hadith, they come from al-Imam al-Baqir or al-Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. It's not because they used to work more than the other Imams. It's because they lived in a time where Bani Umayyah, the Umayyad caliphs, they were too busy with internal problems and civil wars and so on, and especially their war against the rebels, against the Abbasid rebels, who at the end they will kill them and they will become the new caliphs, the Abbasid caliphs. So these internal problems allowed Imam al-Baqir and al-Sadiq to have a lot of freedom to teach people and to spread knowledge and so on, which is a thing that other Imams didn't have, like Imam Baqir and al-Sadiq had. Imam Musa al-Kadhim, who is the son of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, in his life, he's famous because he was sent to jail by Harun al-Rashid, who is maybe the worst Abbasid caliph, and actually he even died in jail. Then we had Imam Ali al-Rida. In his life, the son of Harun al-Rashid, who is al-Ma'mun, chose him as his successor. So the aim of it was to use the figure of Imam Ali al-Rida to have a kind of popular support and maybe also support of some groups that had some Shia orientations, because Al-Ma'mun was in a crisis against other members of the Abbasid family who wanted to take caliphate from him. And at the end, he killed Imam Ali al-Rida when he used Imam Ali al-Rida and he had all this support and so on. But at the end, Imam Ali al-Rida became a kind of threat against his own caliphate. So that's why at the end he killed Imam Ali al-Rida. Then Imam Muhammad al-Jawad alayhi salam became Imam, and he's very famous because he became also Imam at a very young age. And although he was at a very young age, he was the most knowledgeable man in that time. Then we had Imam Ali al-Hadi and Imam Hassan al-Askari, the two last Imams before Imam al-Mahdi. And their main role was to guide people, and especially to prepare Shia Muslims for the occultation of Imam al-Mahdi, Ajallah Faraj al-Sharif. Because Shia Muslims and Shia followers and so on, they were used to have an apparent Imam, to visit them, to ask them questions, to have apparent Imam who were present for them. So Imam Ali al-Hadi and Imam Hassan al-Askari, because they knew that very soon Imam al-Mahdi will be born and then will go into occultation, al-ghaiba, and that if the Shia Muslims are not prepared, they will have a big crisis. Because they knew all that, they prepared the Shia for this fact by teaching them to be more independent and by other things. Then we have Imam al-Mahdi, Ajalullah Faraj al-Sharif, who is the son of Imam Hassan al-Askari, and who, we Shia Muslim, we believe that he is the son of Imam Hassan al-Askari, and that he was born and that he went into first a small occultation, Ghaiba al-Sughra, then a big occultation, Al-Ghaiba al-Kubra, and that at the end he will come back in order to eliminate injustice on this earth and to guide the whole of humanity in the right path of God. The appointment of the Imam. The Shia belief states that an Imam is always chosen by Nas. So what is Nas? Nas is the fact that an Imam is appointed by the Prophet. So that's the case of the first Imam, Imam Ali, or by the previous Imam. For example, Imam Hassan Askari was appointed as an Imam by the previous Imam, his father, Imam Ali al-Hadi. And that's the most important thing in the debates between Shia and Muslims. Because we, Shia, we have first of all Shia hadith proving it. Then even from the Sunni sources, we find a hadith that prove it, that prove that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his life, he chose Imam Ali as the first Imam, and that he ordered Muslims to follow him. So now we will have 3 ahadiths that you can find in Shia sources, but also in Sunni sources. They all prove that the Prophet Muhammad chose Imam Ali as the first Imam and as his successor and as the caliph of the Muslims that they have to follow. The first hadith is Hadith Yawm al-Dar. At the very beginning of the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad, Allah revealed to the Prophet the following verse: and warn your closest relatives. وَانذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. So, when you have a special thing, when you have, in this case, it's prophethood, and it's guiding people, it's normal that your relatives, they have a right on you. They have a right to know the content of this message that you hold. And they have the right that you invite them and guide them in the right path. That's why in the very beginning of the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad, Allah said to the Prophet, go and warn your closest relatives. Then the details of what happened, they can be found in a hadith called Hadith Yawm al-Dar. This hadith, you can find it in Shia sources and in Sunni sources. Of course, you can find some different versions, but on all these different versions, you have very small differences. Differences on some words, differences in the way of explaining it. But the main idea of the hadith, the main content of the hadith in all the versions is the same. You can find it in Sunni and Shia sources. So the story is that the Prophet Muhammad, after this verse, he invited his relatives to his house and to have a meal together. And after the meal, after they they ate the meal, he told them that he's a prophet sent by Allah. And then he said to he said to them, so which of you assist me in this mission so that I make him my brother and my successor and my caliph among you? Nobody responded to him, but Ali was the youngest of all. He said, "O the Prophet, I will assist you." The Prophet ﷺ said, "This is my brother and my successor among you. Listen to him and obey him." So that's a very important hadith. Why? Because it shows that the issue of the imamate was present since the beginning of the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad. Since the beginning, it was an issue. Since the beginning, it was present in the Islamic teachings. Since the beginning, it was present in the mind of the Prophet Muhammad. It's not something who came later. It's not something who is secondary, not important, or is just political. It was something present from the beginning. Of course, at the end of the hadith, I just took a part, but if you take the whole hadith, at the end of it, the relatives of the Prophet, they laugh and they mock Abu Talib, because the Prophet said to them, listen and obey to Ali. And you know the Arab culture, telling to someone to obey to his young boy, it's like they take it as a mockery. But that doesn't have anything to do with that. Imam Ali is an imam on everyone. So they accept it or not, he is the imam chosen by God. The second hadith is Hadith al-Ghadir. Hadith al-Ghadir in Sunni sources and also in Shia sources is one of the most authentic hadith that we have. It's very, very difficult to find more authentic than Hadith al-Ghadir, because it was an event, a public event, and a lot of companions and a lot of people attended it and listened to what the Prophet said, and they transmit it. So the result is that we have a hadith was transmitted and narrated by a lot of people who witnessed this event. So no one discussed the authenticity of Hadith al-Ghadir. No one. Even among Sunni Muslims, they consider the Hadith as being authentic. However, they will discuss the content. They will say it's not a proof that the Prophet chose Imam Ali as a successor. It's just a proof that the Prophet loves Imam Ali and he likes him and he wants people to like him. But we will see that it's not the case. It's more than that. Hadith al-Ghadir, to give you the context. After the last pilgrimage of the Prophet Muhammad in Mecca, in his way to Medina, so he finished the pilgrimage. In his way to Medina, to go back to Medina, he stopped in a Ghadir Khum. This region, Ghadir, is an intersection region where you find a lot of paths, different paths. So a lot of people were following the Prophet Muhammad to Ghadir Khum. And it was the place where every group who was with the Prophet Muhammad will take a different path and go to their country. So it's a very strategic place, because they will listen to the hadith and go spread it in their countries and villages and cities and so on. And the hadith states that the sun was very burning them. It was very hot. Even though the sun was burning them, it was very hot, the Prophet Muhammad said that he will stop here and that he will have a speech. And in this speech, he took the hand of Imam Ali and he said the following thing. God is my master, and I am the master of the believers, and I am most worthy among them. Therefore, anyone whose master is me, then Ali is his master. Man kuntu mawlah, fa'aliyun mawlah. The Prophet repeated this sentence 3 times and said, "O Allah, support whoever supports Ali, and be the enemy of whoever incurs the hostility of Ali, and aid whoever aids Ali, and forsake whoever forsake Ali. اللهم والي من والى وعادي من عادى منصور من نصر واخذل من خذل." So the word used here, so I took the translation in English, master. The word in Arabic is mawla. And kuntu mawla, فهذا علي mawla. The Sunni, they say here mawla doesn't mean master. It means friend or ally, but it doesn't mean master. And this cannot be accepted. First of all, the whole speech is very, very, very important. And it has a context which shows that it's very important. It's in a high rank of importance. The Prophet didn't only stop people, they were 1,000 according to the hadith, under a burning sun, only to say, that's Ali, that's my friend, we are best friends, you have to love him as I love him. That's not the behavior of the Prophet, nor the purpose of the Prophet. And the context of the speech is very clear. The Prophet says at the beginning, God is my master, and I am the master of the believers. And he begins by reminding them that the guy who is speaking in front of you is the master of the believers. So listen well to what I will tell right now. And the whole context, the situation shows that this event was an important event, to tell an important thing, not just to tell, the Prophet will stop thousands of people just to tell that Ali is my friend, that Ali right now is your friend and your ally and you have to love him. That's very clearly a public appointment of the Imam as the successor of the Prophet and as the leader and the master of the believers after him. That's a clear political, religious appointment of the Imam. The last hadith is Hadith al-Thaqalain. So I took a Sunni hadith from Sahih Muslim. Sahih Muslim is also very, very important for Muslims, for Sunni Muslims. They also consider that every hadith that is in Sahih Muslim is authentic, like the hadith in Sahih Bukhari. And this hadith in Sahih Muslim, so it's Hadith al-Thaqalain, the Sahih Muslim version, has been narrated by, I think, Zayd bin Arqam. So the Prophet says in this hadith, I'm leaving behind 2 precious things. So he had this speech, this hadith, before his death. And he's telling the Muslims that he will die, like everyone. كل نفس ذائقة الموت. Everyone will die. But before dying, he will leave behind 2 important things. Which are these 2 important things? We'll see. I'm leaving behind 2 precious things among you. The first of the 2 is the book of Allah. In it is guidance and light. So get hold of the book of Allah and adhere to it. Then he urged and motivated us regarding the book of Allah. Then he said, and my Ahl al-Bayt. So the first of the Thaqalain, the first of the 2 precious things is the book of Allah, the Holy Quran. What's the second? The second is his holy family, Ahl al-Bayt. Then he said, and my Ahl al-Bayt. I urge you to remember God regarding my Ahl al-Bayt. I urge you to remember God regarding my Ahl al-Bayt. I urge you to remember God regarding my Ahl al-Bayt. So the thaqalain, the two paths that exist to guide people according to the Prophet Muhammad after him are the Quran and the holy family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And who is at the head of this family? It's Imam Ali alayhi salam and Fatima al-Zahra. So that was just an example, this hadith and the other hadith, that in Sunni sources you can find proofs that prove that Allah, by His Prophet, chose the imams as successors of the Prophet to guide them, to guide the Muslims. And you have a lot, it's not an exaggeration, you have a lot of this hadith in Sunni sources. You have ayat al-wilaya in the Holy Quran, and hadith on it, and the Sunni sources when Imam Ali in his prayer he gave the ring to Abu and so on. You have a lot of this hadith. In our case, I just took 3 examples: hadith Yawm al-Dar, hadith al-Ghadir, and hadith al-Thaqalain. The philosophy of the Imamate. So in this part, I will not take a lot of time because a lot of things that we had last week on prophethood and the philosophy of prophethood are the same in the case of the philosophy of the Imamate. We as Shia Muslims, we believe that the Imamate is like prophethood is a divine grace, lutf ilahi. And Allah in His perfection, inside this perfection, He is merciful. He has this mercy towards His creatures. And because He's merciful, He sends people to guide His creatures. And like He sent prophets to guide the communities before the Prophet Muhammad, and like He sent the Prophet Muhammad, after the Prophet Muhammad, He also chose the imams as successors of the Prophet Muhammad to guide people in the path of the teachings of the Quran and also in the holy teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Imamate, like prophethood, is the result of the divine grace. And we spoke in more detailed in a more detailed way about the divine grace last week. You can watch again the lecture of last week. One of the very important thing is that imams are guardians of the authenticity of Islam. After every prophet, you can find inside his community tensions, different interests, people wanting to have the power on his followers, people wanting to defend their own interests, maybe economic, maybe political interests. So there must be among the community people chosen by Allah who guide Muslims in the right path of the Prophet Muhammad, who also will be the guardians of this authentic Islam. Otherwise, Islam will disappear. After the Prophet of Muhammad, if we look at the events, there were very dangerous things. Civil wars, people killing each other, dictators, the caliphs were no, they were simply dictators. So we need inside the Muslim communities, we need imams chosen by God, are the gods of this Islam, especially that there will be no more prophets after the Prophet Muhammad. So no more prophet to guide people. So we need guardians of this authentic Islam, because there will be no more prophets or messengers after Prophet Muhammad. So no more new religion. That's the last religion of Allah. So it needs a guidance. One of the very important points is that Imamate is also linked with the social and political leadership of the Ummah. Islam is not just related to spiritual issues or religious stuff, fasting, prayers. No. Of course, it concerns all these religious things, but it also concerns the whole other aspects of life, among them the social and political and economical aspect of life. And also in these fields, we need people guiding us and being leaders to stay in the path of the Prophet Muhammad. So Imamate is not just about the religious stuff. It's also the social decisions, the political orientations, economics, and all this, in our belief, has to be held by the imams, chosen by God. The necessity for the final proof. That's a very important philosophical even point, is that Allah, He never, He cannot let and leave His creation without a final proof. That's why we call the Imam al-Hujjah, Hujjatullah. There will always be a Hujjah of God on the creation. It was prophets, and now it's the Imams, and in our time it's the Imam al-Mahdi. He's a proof, so that people in the hereafter, they cannot pretend that Allah didn't send anyone. He didn't appointed people to guide them. And that people cannot accuse Allah of being unjust. He didn't care. He didn't send us any prophets. Then he didn't even choose for us imams. So that's why we always believe that Allah always choose people to be proof on His creation and on His creatures. لولا الإمام لصاغت الأرض. Without the Imam, the earth would have been destroyed. It's in the same philosophy. It means that Allah created the world on the idea of His justice. However, His justice, which is a part of His perfection, in this justice, He needs to choose imams for the people. Because if He doesn't do it, then there isn't any final proof on His creatures if they disobey Him. That's one of the most important points in the philosophy of the Imamate. Some of their features are very fast, because as you already know, most of these features we explained them in our lecture last week, because it's also features that you can find in prophets. Imams are perfect on the level of ethics and morality. As we explained it for the prophets, we cannot accept that Allah sends prophets that are not perfect on this level. The same thing for the imams. How people can even follow imams if they don't have good ethics, good morality, good behaviors with them? So that's one of their features. They have the best akhlaq. The second feature is knowledge. because they are imams and they have to guide us, they need knowledge. This knowledge can be taken by from the Prophet. So, you know, for example, there are a lot of hadiths. For example, the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, very famous. أنا مدينة العلم وعلي بابها. I'm the city of the knowledge, and Ali is its key, for example. Or another hadith from Imam Ali, where he says that the Prophet taught him 1,000 door of knowledge, and every door opens 1,000 other doors. Infallibility. In itself, infallibility deserves like 2 or 3 lectures, because it's very important, and it's also something that the other Islamic sects don't accept. We believe that imams, but like prophets, imams must be ma'sumun, must be infallibles, because they have to guide people to the right path of Islam. They have themselves to be infallibles. Otherwise, people will not follow them. So how can I follow Imam Ja'far Sadiq if, for example, he commits sins, if he lies, if he does this or that sin? And we have proofs on this belief. For example, you all know Ayat al-Tathir and Hadith al-Kisa, which is related to this Ayat al-Tahir, and so on. One of their last features is that they are the best individuals in the world. We believe that the imams, they are the best. And Allah He only chooses imams, individual who are the best in their time. That, as I believe, it's important as a feature, because there was a lot of debates between Muslims on this point. For example, some Mu'tazili scholars, especially the Mu'tazili scholars of Baghdad, because they had 2 schools, one in Baghdad and one in. So when we say school, it's not a building; it's school of thought. The Mu'tazila, it's a Sunni group. They disappeared, but they were very important, and they have 2 schools of thought. One in Baghdad, one who was in Baghdad, one who was in Basra. The one who was in Baghdad, a lot of their scholars, they used to say that Imam Ali is the best. He's the best after the Prophet Muhammad, and he's better than Abu Bakr. He's better even than Omar and Uthman. He's the best companion, and he's the best man after the Prophet Muhammad. But that doesn't mean that he has to be Imam. They had a belief that even if someone is better than the others, it doesn't mean that he has to be Imam. And that's why we Shia believe that no, Allah only chooses the best people as imams, and He cannot let and leave the best people and choose people who are less better. And that was the last point of our lecture today.